With so many organisations analysing the property market, it can be hard to determine just who has the right reading on what is happening with prices across Australia. And I have to say there's a distinct possibility that none of them is correct. I recently did an online search for the median house price for a particular suburb in one of the major capital cities and came up with 6 different figures from 6 different data sources. And the difference between the highest and the lowest figures was more than $100,000. In other words, the lowest figure was $628,000 and the highest was $737,000. So there's a huge difference there. And you can search any suburb or town in the nation and you'll find similar results. Huge differences in the numbers which purport to describe the median house price in any of those locations. You'll probably find a source that said prices are rising in a particular location, and you'll also find another source which says prices are falling in that same place. So it's no wonder that people are confused about what is actually happening in real estate markets across Australia. It's important when reading data on property prices, or for that matter on rents or vacancies, to be aware that each organisation has its own methodology and its own parameters. And be aware that, fundamentally, all real estate data is dodgy data, and you shouldn't take it as gospel truth, as media tends to do. A recent example is the May property data from 2 major sources, CoreLogic and SQM Research. And this shows just how different the figures can be when using different methodologies and perhaps even different motivations. Now, the media often quotes CoreLogic figures without ever questioning their methods or their numbers, but when you dig down deeply into it, you realise that a lot of its analysis leaves much to be desired. CoreLogic published its property price report early on the 1st of June and claimed that it described what happened to prices across Australia during May. Now, this is an 8-page report with graphs and charts and tables, plus analysis of what all the data actually means, allegedly. They didn't throw this report together overnight. It actually involves weeks of work by a team of people. And you can be sure that the 1 June report does not truly reflect anywhere near all the transactions which actually occurred in May, many of which have not yet settled. In reality, that 1 June report is probably more reflective of what happened to prices in April than during May. That's why you should consider anything claiming to be up-to-date median house price data with a grain of salt. Even when opposing data companies agree on the same overall trend that's happening in the market, their figures can be vastly different. For example, SQM Property and CoreLogic agree that prices are continuing to grow in smaller capital cities and regional markets, but the numbers they publish are really quite different. SQM Research says nationwide house prices grew 1.6% in May, whereas CoreLogic said they actually fell 0.1%. SQM reports that Brisbane, Adelaide, Canberra and Hobart all recorded increases above 2% during the month of May. It says Sydney prices recorded no change in May, but CoreLogic says that Sydney prices fell 1.1%. Meanwhile, CoreLogic says Adelaide had the highest monthly price growth amongst the capital city of 1.9%. So none of the cities were over that 2% figure for the month of May that SQM Research came up with. SQM also says that in the 12 months to the end of May, house prices have grown nationally 19%, while CoreLogic says the figure is around 15%. Now, I know from years of experience with property price data that if we looked at figures from 4 different sources, say Domain, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, as well as SQM and CoreLogic, they'll all come up with a whole different set of figures and quite often conflicting results. And it's important to highlight these differences, not to disparage these organisations, but to show real estate consumers that relying on just one source of information is not the way to gain a full understanding of what is happening in the various property markets across Australia. It's also important to get a copy of the actual figures published by the research companies rather than rely on the media's interpretation of the figures, because this inevitably will be negative, sensationalist, and very often misleading.